Hello and welcome to the Book Bunch. My name is Sam. It is so great to have you guys for another video. I do need to make a little disclaimer. I'm very sick, so I sound terrible and I am probably going to be sniffling throughout, so I apologize for that one. Please bear with me. But yeah, we're going to get right into the video. This week I have been reading a lot of classics. A couple were for Victober and then a couple were just because I thought I'd just smash out a bunch of classics. There were a couple of DNFs and a couple of pretty good ones, so we'll get right into it. The first one I DNF'd was this compilation of two of Jules Verne's books, which is From the Earth to the Moon and then the sequel Around the Moon. I didn't like it just because it was super boring. The first 100 pages was just talking about this like American gun club that kind of ruled society at the time, like this kind of an alternate history thing. It's meant to be set like in either like World War One or World War Two, and they made all this money and were super famous and everything because of their war efforts and like making all these cannons and guns and stuff that like outdid the rest of the world's military. And the war had ended and they're like, what are we going to do now? No one wants us around. How are we going to make our money and everything, because we love guns and we love cannons and we just want to keep achieving these things, but we've got no reason to, and all of that kind of stuff. So the president of the club devises this plan that they're going to build this rocket to the moon using their like cannon technology basically. It was super boring though. Like I said, that whole first 100 pages was just them talking about it and how good they were and how much they love guns and like all this scientific stuff, like various math problems and stuff, and I just hated it. So it was super boring and I just put it down because I was waiting for it to pick up some action or for them to at least get to the moon, and it just never happened. So I put it down. I then read about a third of Dante's Inferno. This is part one of a 3-part epic poem, which I don't think most people realize. This isn't a standalone. This is just part one of a big poem called The Divine Comedy. And it wasn't like offensive or anything. It is definitely theologically inaccurate, but it wasn't offensive. Like, I feel like it's fine for Christians to read, but it was just so incredibly boring because this is like very early Italian Catholicism and their kind of views on stuff, and I just didn't love it. It's also like a really old poem, so I'm not a huge poetry fan as it is, and trying to read a poem in like their old talk is really difficult because half the time I didn't understand what was happening. But basically it's about this guy who, I think he's got like an angel, or it might even meant to be Jesus or something, that's walking with him through hell, and it's just like his thoughts and reflections on that as he's going through on his way to purgatory and then afterwards onto heaven. So part 2 is all about purgatory and then part 3 is all about heaven. So I wouldn't mind getting hold of, if they even have it in print, the part of the poem that's meant to be about heaven. But yeah, wouldn't necessarily recommend it just because it was a bit boring. I also read The Bell Jar, which I did finish, but I don't even know that I could rate this, and I don't recommend it. It is, the whole story is basically an autobiography of Sylvia Plath's life, with a few fictional changes, I'm assuming to help cover her identity. But it's about this young woman who kind of has everything falling into place for her, but she kind of ends up in this deep depression because she's like, what's kind of the point of any of it? And she realizes that a lot of the things that she thought was great were very empty. And um, if there was faith in this story, I feel like it would have been really awesome. It could have been a really good redeeming story, but she doesn't have any of that, and it does make me really sad for her. But yeah, it talks about her then, like the rest of the whole story is about her in a psychiatric hospital after a suicide attempt or a couple of suicide attempts, and yeah, her navigating all of that. It is very sad. Talks about some really horrible things. It wasn't clean, but yeah, the bell jar. It really affected me, and if I'd known what it was about, I probably wouldn't have read it, but I went into it pretty blind, so I'll leave that with you. On a happier note, I finally made it to Jane Eyre. I've had this book for like 8 or so years, something like that, maybe even longer. It's so, like, it's been in my collection so long that the spine has actually discolored. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but the bottom half, it must have been like sitting in the sun or something, but it actually has discolored. It's not like hugely noticeable because it almost looks like it's just an ombre situation, but that's not how it was when I got it. It actually is good discolored. But yes, this was a really good book. I really liked it. It's 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. I was really worried about reading it because I was worried I'd hate it, because it is obviously a very beloved classic, and I sometimes, well, most of the time, find that the more hyped up a classic is, the more I end up not liking it, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's just I don't vibe with classic writing styles very well or what, but yeah, I was a bit worried. However, this one reads a lot like the writing in The Secret Garden and Anne of Green Gables, like super smooth, easy to get to, super easy language. I really enjoyed it for that alone. Plus, the actual story was really interesting. It is about this like orphan girl who isn't wanted by the guardians that are looking after her, that are actually her relatives, but they don't want her because the relative that did initially adopt her, he died, and then she was left to his family, and his family didn't want her. So they sent her off to this school of orphans where she got her education, and she ends up becoming a governess for this very rich gentleman who's quite a bit older than her. Sorry, I just coughed and it was a bad one. Yeah, so much older than her, because she is like 18 or something, and he's like 40, 45, 40, something like that. I don't know. So not like, I don't know. There's just a big age difference, and so she ends up coming to be governess at his house because he is the guardian of this little French girl, and there is obviously a romance between the two of them, the governess Jane, and this master of the house, and like all of this stuff happens. There's a lot of like crazy drama in it, which was actually kind of a wild journey. And there's some moments there that it's a bit touch and go, but it does all work out in the end. And during this whole like story, there's like this second understory that's like spooky going on in the background, which ends up being like a huge plot point towards the end about this it's almost like the mansion is haunted, but it might not actually be haunted. And Jane thinks that it's not haunted, but that it's actually this like one of the servant girls is like maybe a bit wacky or something like that. She's not sure, and she doesn't understand why the master of the house hasn't done anything about it, and so she's trying to investigate more about it while all this other stuff is happening and people's lives are threatened and like all of this stuff, and it's wild. So it's good for the spooky season if you're into that. I'm not really into it, but I just happened to read it around spooky time, and it was kind of good. There is also some strong faith elements in this that I really, really did like. Um, Jane's faith is also put to the test. The faith elements I really love about the book are actually towards the beginning, where Jane has a friend in this like orphanage school thing, and the way this other little girl talks about God is just so beautiful and so touching. But then there's like kind of almost an absence of faith for a while until like Jane's own faith gets tested a bit, and then it kind of comes back again. But yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. Jane Eyre, guys, pick it up, read it. I then reread The Secret Garden because I haven't read this since I was a really little girl, and it was one of my favourite stories ever. And if you saw one of my previous hauls, I picked up this beautiful edition of it, which I absolutely love. And so I thought I'd give it a read because I actually couldn't remember a lot of this. And it wasn't until I was rereading this that I was like, man, I've forgotten like most of this. Or I'd confused things in my mind and like made up almost memories of what I thought this story was about. But it's about this girl named Mary who is a snotty child, which I forgot that the whole first bit is her being like an absolute little snot face. But she's snotty and she's spoiled, and she is a very disagreeable child because she's not loved and she's basically neglected by her parents and everything. And she lives in India, and her parents were wealthy, so she just like has these like nannies and stuff that look after her all the time. But this is around the time of like slavery and all of that kind of stuff, so there is some not very nice racial things in there, so just be aware of that. But yeah, so they basically have these servants, Indian servants, that look after her, and she mistreats them greatly. But then there's like a huge plague that goes through and wipes out everybody, and she's pretty much the only one that survives, and so she gets sent to live in England. I think it's England, maybe it's Wales, something like that, to live with one of her uncles or someone she's sort of related to, in this big house that has over 100 rooms and these beautiful gardens. And at first she's all snotty, and then she goes and she plays outside for a while, and she ends up discovering that she loves outside, and it makes her healthy and strong and good, and she ends up making friends and like with all the animals in the garden and some of the people that work and live around the like estate thing. And there's like a whole secret apart from the secret garden that happens within the mansion, and it's just really good. So yeah, I do recommend it. It's super easy to read, super fast, super clean, and just a wholesome story. I also picked up King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Skimmed a lot of this book because it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. And I kind of just ended up wanting the bones of the story rather than the details because it actually drags on quite a bit. So this is a rewrite of the original, because apparently quite a few people have rewritten this because it's one of those stories that were written a long, long time ago and the wording wasn't great. So different people over time have rewritten it to make it basically in our modern language and all the rest of it. But it's not what I thought. Like, compared to some of the movies and stuff, I was a bit shocked. Since Guinevere is like not good, she ended up like, I'm gonna tell you because like Merlin tells you pretty much straight up at the beginning. But Guinevere cheats on King Arthur, and I was like, bro, what? I don't know. I thought this was like a kid's book, but there's just a few elements in it that I'm like, that doesn't make it a kid's book. Like, it doesn't really go into detail, so I guess like it might be okay for younger audiences to read because they might not understand what it's talking about, but I don't know. I don't know. I feel like maybe just stick to adults. But I didn't love it. I didn't even like it as a Christian, like, because it, like, King Arthur's meant to be a follower of God or something, and like so are the people, like the knights and stuff. But I don't know. It was weird. It was weird. I didn't like it. I don't even know what to say about it apart from I didn't like it. It was a bit boring. It didn't go where I thought it would go. And yeah, it kind of ruined King Arthur for me, to be honest. So there's that. I'm going to leave it there for you, but I'd probably only give it a 2 out of 5, if that, because it was not good. But I really like the cover, so I might keep it. And finally, I read The Scarlet Pimpernel. This is a book that's written by a Christian author. It's not actually like Christian fiction, I would say. But this was, yeah, written by a Christian author at the very start of the 1900s or very late 1800s, something like that. And I read this and I picked it up because I watched the movie with my husband's family and it was flippin' hilarious. It's probably the funniest movie I've ever seen in my life. I thought it was great. It's the same vein as like Princess Bride, but done way better in my opinion. So if you like Princess Bride, definitely go watch The Scarlet Pimpernel. However, the book version isn't funny at all. They took out all the funny bits. Well, like obviously this was written first. But it doesn't have any of the funny bits because the movie is more like, because this was originally intended to be a play. So the play I feel like would have been just as funny as the movie and would have had the same vibes. And the movie is more so from the perspective of one of the men in the book rather than Marguerite's perspective. So Marguerite, she is like this famous French woman who she's like an actor and a singer and blah blah blah. And everyone wanted to be married to her and everything. But she ends up marrying this Englishman that's a bit dull, or seems to be a bit dull. But he's very rich and he managed to woo her. And so she moves to England. And this is like going on at the same time as the French Revolution is happening. And there's this like band of Englishmen that don't agree with what's happening in France and want to try and save some of the noble French men's lives and their families from the guillotine. So they go off, like this band of Englishmen go off and like dress up in disguises and everything and save these Englishmen and bring them, Frenchmen, and bring them back to England and like save them. And the leader of this group, his name is the Scarlet Pimpernel, and he is the original like Zorro masked bandit situation. And in the movie, it's very funny because you get to see the Scarlet Pimpernel's like him in action, and you get to see his like persona and everything, and you also get to see the guy who is the Scarlet Pimpernel that no one knows is the Scarlet Pimpernel. You get to see his character as well, and it's very funny. And like finding out, like when people find out who he is and like all of this stuff, it's very, very amusing. But in this, because it's from someone else's perspective, and it's obviously written form, and she's not around for a lot of the scenes in the movie that are funny, it's not in there, and you don't get to see the funny like personality and the things he says. Like in the movie, he's got this tagline where like, well, like not the Scarlet Pimpernel, but her husband, who's like this dull guy. He has this like, when he goes to balls and different things, and like people insult him all the time because they think he's stupid and like whatever, and he's become the butt of everyone's jokes. So when they make fun of him to his face, he'll like say something, and then he'll be like, sink me, and like say all these like dumb things, and like it's hilarious. It's very funny. I don't do a very good job at it, but it's very hilarious. Anyway, she doesn't write him like that in this. because from the wife's perspective, she kind of loathes him at this point in the story because her and him had a falling out after they got married, and so they're very estranged. And so she doesn't write him in this funny, like when she's telling the story, she doesn't tell him as this like funny guy or talk about his personality in that way because she's got a grudge against him. So yeah, I don't know. It was still very good. I really liked it. I'd still probably give it 3.5, maybe a 4 out of 5 stars because it's still enjoyable. It's still the whole masked bandit thing. It's just a more serious take than the movie. So yeah, the only reason it falls short and I'm giving it a lower rating than it probably deserves is just because I really liked how funny the movie was and I was expecting it to be funny and it never got funny. So there's that. But that's all the classics I've read recently. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if there's any other classics you'd like me to pick up and give a read to. But yeah, I'd love to hear your comments your thoughts in the comments below. And hopefully when I see you guys in the next video, I will be much better and I won't sound so terrible. And yeah, you guys have a great week. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!